Hey friends, welcome to the Rhythms for Life podcast, where each week we talk about rhythms for building resilience so you can take charge of your mental, spiritual, and relational health.
These ideas come from Rebekah's best-selling book, Building a Resilient Life: How Adversity Awakens Strength, Hope, and Meaning. So grab your copy, invite your friends, and let's build resilience together.
Welcome back. I'm Rebekah.
And I'm Gabe. Welcome to another conversation on rhythms. And we're hearing from so many of you that you have started the October
Rhythms Challenge.
Oh,
yeah.
We've been doing it.
Lots of walking, some soup, some reading, some journaling, some devos. It's a fun community, I'll have to say. They keep me on my toes.
Out.
Yes.
It's just all these rhythms that all of us want to do, but we don't often make the time. And it's fun to hear how you guys are taking the time to be intentional about that. And what a great month to do that. I think, personally, the noise around us is so loud around everything related to our world right now that if we don't practice these kinds of rhythms and have a sort of an internal clock that's driving a way we're going to stay healthy mentally, physically, have clarity, then you're really going to get swayed by the winds of what's happening during our current cultural moment.
Yeah. So I picked up a rhythm again that it's been a long time. So I have a rhythm that I haven't done since I had foot surgery in January, which is embarrassing. It's been a long time. But we have a rower upstairs, and Gabe keeps telling me it's like the best workout possible because it works every part of your body, which I don't know.
It does.
Okay.
The rower's the best.
Yeah. So anyways, for me, I just get on that and I'll go at a pace, and there's a rhythm obviously attached to it. And for me to slow down mentally, I'll just put on worship and almost like pray while I'm rowing, because the music, obviously, you need some bit of rhythm while you're also rowing. But then I also just feel like it's kind of a sacred time to like unwind, calm down. And it's been really energizing.
I know. I'm impressed. I cannot relate at all to this idea of worshiping and working out. Like, that sounds so weird to me. But it's working for Rebekah. And for me, if I'm on a rower, I can't go nearly as long as you go on that rower. And it's like a hard exercise.
Well, that's because most people are sprinting on a rower. I can't. Right. I go
do a marathon.
I did 6,000 meters, but again, it takes me like 32 minutes.
I know, but you don't stop. And I can't imagine. It's kind of like swimming. Back in the day, I did a triathlon.
I remember.
This was like 20 years ago, so not anytime recently.
I have pictures.
But a long row reminds me of like a long swim when you're out in a lake and you're having to swim in murky water and there's no shoreline. Like, you're just going and you start to get to points where you're like, I can't do this anymore. So your mental toughness is impressive that you don't stop, because most people do not row 6,000 meters without stopping. Like, that's kind of unheard of.
You know who inspired me was Ann Boskamp, because we would send photos of like our rowing distance to one another, and she was doing 4,000 and 5,000, and I was at like 3,000. I'm like, okay, now I'm inspired.
That's impressive.
But I don't know. It's just the pacing. So back to the Rhythms Challenge, is the whole point of these regulating rhythms is that they calm the brain. And in a cultural moment of a whole lot of input, and it will want to create anxiety in us.
Yeah.
And so we have to combat that with some form of a regulating rhythm.
Yeah. So if you want to jump in on that, I know we're a week into October, but go to RebekahAlliance.com/October and you can actually get this great download that allows you to map this out, make a little bit of a plan, make sure you have rhythms. We are 4 weeks away from an election here in the U.S. that, as Rebekah referenced, I mean, there can be a lot of stress around this. We don't want to be the kind of people that have stress. We want to be like a non-anxious presence in the midst of an anxious moment for a lot of people, and to bring that kind of sweetness and hopefulness and kindness into our spaces, into our families, into our friendships. And rhythms is a great way to make sure you're maintaining that.
Yeah, October is also significant for us because it's Down Syndrome Awareness Month, and it's just, I don't know, a fun month to give Kate and Joy even a little more love. I mean, they pretty much do whatever they want, Everything's a party, everything's a snack, everything's a recreational activity. But it just gives us more joy, especially with having them home with us now full time for the last year while our other two are at college. Just allows us to just think about what makes their life great, and what helps them thrive. And we always aim for that, but I feel like each year as it passes and as they grow, I'm more inspired to do that. I want to see them continue to flourish into their however many years God has.
Yeah, and we love awareness because so many of these children are terminated. They're aborted when the mother and father finds out in utero that there's a chance through all this new testing and genetic testing that their child might have Down syndrome, even though a lot of these tests are false positives. And so a lot of these children never make it into the world.
Yeah.
So that's obviously we love people just being aware of them. And most people that we know that have a friend that has Down syndrome, they just love them. They're so fun. They're so sweet.
Yeah.
They really remind us, they keep you and me very reminded of what's most important in the world and in life. And we love that.
And they're also sassy. Joy's sassy and Cade's stubborn. So they're not like angels, like literal angels, but they do, they keep a pulse of the barometer. Like they're a barometer and they tell us like the temperature of the home. So if everyone's happy and everyone's free and everyone's connected, they are just delightful. And if they sense any bit of tension, like their EQ is so high, any bit of tension, their countenance changes immediately. And they make sure we are aware that they're aware.
So convicting when I see that happening. It's like, okay, let's get this worked out.
I know.
I also, today, we have a great conversation that gets into some of this idea. Rich Villodas is helping us think about something that's referred to a lot in Scripture as the narrow path or the narrow way. And this path is mostly regarded as an understood idea about the fact that those who follow Jesus, this is a narrow path. All the other paths are wide and lead to destruction. And he really takes a deeper dive into that and discusses it. And so we had a great conversation with Rich about this concept and also his own rhythms and how he lives this out on a daily basis, weekly basis, as a leader with a family, with priorities and responsibilities and a desire to be productive. It's a lot like me. He actually has really had to work hard to incorporate a different rhythm to his life. And so we're excited for you guys to get to hear a little more from him just about how he's doing that and hope it inspires you. So let's listen in now to Rich Villodas.
Well, welcome to the podcast, Rich. We are so excited for this conversation. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for the kind invitation. Love both of the work that you're doing, and so just glad to be in a conversation with you.
Well, we've enjoyed so much just your intentionality amongst leaders. I know in your church that you've been leading for quite some time, and just those that we share a lot of mutual friendships, but just your intentionality to help encourage formation. And so much of the work Rebekah and I get to be a part of now is around formation of rhythms. What does it mean to live in a really busy world where we're constantly inundated with distraction, with dopamine hits this way and that way? And, it's getting more complicated. And so even the conversations we have through this podcast about rhythms has become really important. And I think it's just going to keep getting more important. And you've just become a voice that's really helping more and more people think through what does it mean to start to practice some things, perhaps differently than you learned, or maybe ways you caught it from your parents or even your religious or church environment. So I want to jump right into rhythms and just in your own life, this journey for you. I know from knowing you that you're highly productive, busy, a lot going on. You get a lot done. You accomplish a lot. And so even the message of your latest book that you've written on the narrow path, I mean, you really were confronting yourself a bit about how do I do this in such a way that allows me to create the space and the margin and the rhythms to practice the way of Jesus in the midst of the storm of productivity. So give us just a little taste and our listeners of what rhythms look like in your life that have helped you take the narrow path.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. There's a few ways I can go about that, but if I go about it from like a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual kind of perspective, that might be helpful.
That'd be great.
I think daily, my daily rhythms, I think, include at some point in the day a time of silent prayer. And so in a given day, my mind is so distracted, so much coming at me in a given day where I just need to set my timer for 5, 10, 15 minutes to be with Jesus, not to get anything from Jesus, but to simply be attentive to his presence. And so on a daily basis, that with and incorporating some scripture into that has been a lifeline for me over the years.
Now, do you just feel that moment? Is it like something you feel like, hey, I need this, and it could be a 1 o'clock one day and 3 o'clock the next, or do you put this on your calendar?
It's usually morning and midday, And so I've been in a rhythm like this for a number of years. Not that there are days where I miss it because of meetings or whatever it might be. And some days it's 5 minutes, some days it's 20 minutes. But this is not like Bible study time. This is just, I need to recenter my heart right now. Some of it is out of necessity. I'm anxious, I'm angry, I'm irritable. And I realize, oh, my wife just says, I think you need to get to God right now. You're in a bad place right now. So some of it is my wife is telling me you need to pray. So that's the daily kind of rhythm. The weekly rhythm is the Sabbath. And so for the last 16 years, Rosie and I and our 2 children, we have practiced Sabbath weekly, Friday nights to Saturday nights. And that's a literal 24-hour period of rhythm for us where we're stepping away from paid and unpaid work. On a monthly basis, I have something called a Day Alone with God, where the third Wednesday of each month, I and my staff team as well, the goal is not to respond to emails, not to get anything done, but to find a place outside of our home, coffee shop, a beach, a nice place to just be with God, to do some reading, reflection, journaling. That's the quarterly thing, which is more seasonal. Rosie and I, we have been very intentional about vacations. This has not been the case with us over the years. In fact, I had one vacation growing up as a child, and so I don't think I need vacations. Rosie grew up with a great rhythm of that, and so we've gotten in a lot of fights around that value about how much vacation we need, and she's won. Intentionally building out vacation time has been important seasonally, and then but annually I go to for the last 16 years. The last couple of years have been different because of the pandemic and all of that. Because monasteries have been closed. But I have like a weekly monastery trip that I go to in the Boston area to spend time with these contemplatives for about 4 or 5 days. So that's in a big kind of year. That's what I'm trying to order my life according to.
So did you say you go to a monastery for 4 or 5 days once a month?
No, once a year.
Once a year. Okay, I was making sure I heard that. I was like, wow, no wonder you are deeply formed. She's like, and now we're going on vacation. As soon as you get back, I'm picking you up. You said a couple of things that I'd love to elaborate on, especially for the listener. You said, I go to Jesus not from what I need from him, but what he wants to reveal to you. So I'd like you to elaborate on that. And then the second thing is Sabbath, right? I love how our mutual friend John Tyson calls Sabbath pleasure stacking, and it's all your favorite things, aligned in a 24-hour period with all your favorite people and just like the delight of God. But I'd love for you to define or describe, not define, but describe what Sabbath has looked like for you individually as well as a family, because we've invited our teens into Sabbath, and I use the word invite loosely originally, and then over time it became more enjoyable. But you need to have a healthy alternative to saying, get off your screens and we're hanging out as people. And so how would you describe those two things for someone who wants to practice this more?
Yeah. So I'll start from the Sabbath piece, because I do think that the prayer piece is actually like mini Sabbaths. And so for the Sabbath piece, first of all, if you're doing it with children, incentivizing Sabbath from the very beginning is the way to go. My children, Rosie and I have been practicing it for 16 years. My daughter's 15. When she was in the womb, she was practicing Sabbath with us. And so when she was 4, I remember she came out of preschool, and we had said it that when Sabbath begins on Friday evening, we have a lot of ice cream. That's how we're starting the Sabbath, with a lot of ice cream.
Right.
And so I remember she gets out on a Friday and she goes, Dad, do you know what today is? And I was like, it's Friday, honey. She goes, no, it's the Sabbath. We're going to get ice cream right now. I was like, oh yeah, she gets this thing now. The problem is my son, Nathan, he takes it to the next level where he's just like, we had Sabbath ice cream when Sabbath started, and ice cream in the middle of Sabbath, at the end of Sabbath. So when I say, no, that's enough ice cream, he's like, but Dad, it's the Sabbath. So he's taking it to the next level.
24 hours of ice cream.
Yeah, exactly right. So Sabbath for us is, it's this 24-hour period without have-tos or shoulds, which over time is to result in deep rest and renewal. And to John, who's a friend of ours, the pleasure stacking, I think the part of Sabbath that is most difficult for people is actually the cultivation of delight. And so for us, the question we're asking is, what brings us joy? What cultivates delight in our life? What gives us energy? Who are the people? What are the foods? What are the things that we're going to stop doing so that we can cultivate this? And doing it over 16 years, I can't imagine not having this rhythm in our lives. In fact, whenever, for whatever reason, we miss one because I'm traveling or something happens, I feel it deeply in my body that I'm missing a rhythm that I was made for.
Yeah.
The prayer piece then becomes, in a way, a mini Sabbath. It's Sabbath is not just about delighting. It's also about communion. It's about being with God. And so when I pray in those moments where I set my timer for 5, 10, 15 minutes, I'm not going there seeing prayer as transactionalism. I think there's time to offer petitions and requests, but it's really about the cultivation of friendship, of being with God, beholding the beauty of God, Psalm 27, verse 4. That for me is a mini Sabbath, those times of prayer that have anchored my life over the last number of years.
I love that.
Yeah, those themes that you just described, a lot of that deals with the rest rhythm that we talk a lot about, and how when you actually incorporate the right amount of rest where you are renewed spiritually, physically, emotionally, you then can give. And I know you give a lot. And recently you've written this book called The Narrow Path, and you're describing a message from Jesus that essentially over the years, many people have just assumed that it meant one thing, and you've actually offered a different view, a different take on how we might think about the narrow path. And I think it's curious because this moment, even culturally, there are so many people awakening to Jesus and who is Jesus. I mean, we're seeing people more boldly declare Jesus as something people should be thinking about. I think 71% of Americans actually have a positive view of Jesus, but I don't know how much they understand the Sermon on the Mount or understand exactly what he was teaching or asking of us. So talk a little bit about this different take that you've taken on this statement from Jesus about the narrow path.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I'm not sure, whenever I talk about Harry Potter, the image of it emerged from a Harry Potter book, which no matter who you talk to this day, somebody's angry about that. And so I remember reading all the books and listening to them and then watching the movie. And there was this a book where Harry and his friends are going through this tent, which on the outside looks pretty narrow, but this tent has been charmed so that when he walks in, it's like this massive flat, beds, kitchen, living room, all the rest there. And I remember watching it and at the same time reading through the Sermon on the Mount. The reason I've read through the Sermon on the Mount for many years is because when my grandfather discipled me when I was 19 for 8 months, he had me live in the words of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. So I'm 45. This has been so important for my own journey for the last 26 years. But as I was watching the Harry Potter book, I was like, oh, on the outside, the teachings of Jesus look very restrictive and constraining. But it's actually when you get on the inside that we actually see the expansive, spacious life that God wants to offer us, which is why my initial title of the book was Narrow Path, Spacious Life. And it ended up just being kind of the narrow path. But that's the idea. What I'm trying to get is Jesus demands and expects everything from us, not just a little bit here. He expects surrender of every aspect of our lives. And it feels restrictive and constraining and narrow, but it's actually the kind of spacious life that we actually long for. So that's kind of the idea that it's the controlling metaphor in many ways of what I believe Jesus is calling us to with our money, with our desires, with our enemies, all the rest.
Yeah, that was my favorite quote in the book where you say, at first Jesus' words seem constraining and restricting, but hidden within them is unimaginable power. So not even just expansive, but there's a power that comes through the Holy Spirit from Jesus that he sent to us to be our constant comforter, counselor, and advocate that is expansive. And it's wild that sometimes we think like, oh, we have to. It's not a scarcity mentality. It's an abundance mentality, but it's a power that's propelling that abundance, right? Like all of a sudden, Sabbath is the best day of the week, the most fun day of the week. It's not this like drudgery that you have to get through, but there's a delight and an enjoyment and a power that I'm sure equips you even for Sunday as you teach or preach, because we know that rest comes. Is what we don't earn rest. We are fueled from rest. And so just the power that comes from that formation is so impactful. And I think you really break down this narrow and broad path, and a lot of believers think that they're all on the broad path, or I'm sorry, the narrow path, because that just seems obvious because we read the text as if it's about us specifically and how we must be doing. It's almost validating everything about us, but we certainly can see someone else's sin in the text, but we don't often see our own. And you just go straight into that. And so describe a little bit about what the distinctions are between narrow and broad, and why it's not what typically people would first perceive.
When folks usually go to that kind of narrow image, it's like, it's those sinners out there that are on the broad path, and watch out. And I think, first of all, you have to remember Jesus is talking to his followers. The language that Jesus offers, what I would contend, and I think what other New Testament scholars would contend as well, is that the emphasis that Jesus is bringing here in the Sermon on the Mount is for here and now. Of course, our actions, our decisions, kind of, to use Maximus' words, kind of echo into eternity, or not? Was that that was Maximus? Wasn't Maximus and Gladiator? But it's very easy to see this as like, narrow is heaven, broad is hell, afterlife, and I think Jesus is talking about the kingdom of God right here, right now. So the broad path, the way that I have tried to distill the teachings of Jesus, is characterized in three ways. It is a kind of moralism, success-ism, and individualism. And I think Jesus is going right at us here, saying, if your life is oriented around those three things, your life is on the broad path. And what's scary about that is there are lots of Christians who say, I am a follower of Jesus, which, by the way, in Matthew chapter 7, he has a word for those who actually do things in his name. They're doing really good things in his name. And then he says, I never knew you, but we casted out demons in your name and did all the stuff. So it's very easy to be part of or around Jesus and even doing the Jesus stuff. And somehow there's a lack of communion, that we're not ordering our lives according to his priorities. And so that moralism, success-ism, and individualism, and my brief summary of those three words is that the moralism is really an emphasis on the externals, the behavior. And so many times in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is trying to take us beneath the surface. You've heard it said, but I say unto you. You've heard it said, don't murder, but man, you're carrying some deep anger. There's some stuff beneath the surface. The success-ism is the way that we have understood what the good life is, which is why I think the Beatitudes turn that on its head from the very beginning. Who's really happy? Who's really blessed? Who's really living the good life? It doesn't look like how the world postures it. And then the individualism is, which feels so on the nose and so Christian 101 and so obvious, that our love for our neighbor is really proof of our love for God. And it's very easy not to live in that particular way. And I think those are the three areas that constitute the broad path that Jesus is coming again.
Well, we're excited to share with you an incredible opportunity this October for your family as we move into an election season at Think, to help you think well and help your kids, maybe it's your small group, your community, your friends, to think well about this election season. We're creating an event that can happen in your living room or around the dining room table called Let's Talk Politics. And we're going to give you access to 4 talks that we've curated specifically for you to come together, watch them for 9 minutes on our smart TV app, and then have a very valuable conversation amongst one another about how can we think well about politics.
I'm so grateful for this conversation and the opportunity to be led through this and guided through this. As we know, our political views can be so polarizing, even with friends and family and people that we love, because we don't listen to one another. We don't hear the felt needs that are coming behind those opinions. And so think creating something that allows you to have ears to hear, to listen, to be curious, to seek to understand, and learn things that you might not have been willing to learn because somebody else is moderating that for you.
Yeah, we're bringing together the best voices, people like Oz Guinness, trusted person who's been a leader. He's 82 years old. Also, William B. Allen, who's one of the greatest political scientists, who has great knowledge. So you're going to learn. This is going to feel like you're getting educated in these short 9-minute conversations. But we also have with us Katie Faust, who's going to help educate you on how to have a child lens on when we're thinking about policies that are going to affect our families and our children, as well as John Bevere giving a talk that's about hope beyond November 5th, because we all know this election doesn't mean everything. It's important. But as Christians, we've got to walk forward and be all a part of creating a better world around us.
As a mama, that means so much to me. I want to know how the political landscape does impact our family, how it impacts our children, what they're learning, what they're exposed to. And I, as a mom, need to be informed. But because there's so much out there, it feels so overwhelming to know where to begin. And so this being curated in a very succinct way that I can talk about this not just as a family with you and the kids, but talk to other moms about this as well and lead these groups even outside of the home, but just however the places are that are impacting what you care most about, we'll all be more versed on what to say and what to know.
So this is available to everybody. This is a gift to you, thinkmedia.com/family. We aren't putting a specific price on this. We're just asking for people to donate, make a contribution of any size to Think Media. And when you do that, you're going to get access to these talks. You're going to be able to download the smart TV app, use it in your living room, wherever you're gathering your family or your friends. We hope you'll take advantage of this to create great conversations that lead to wisdom. Go to thinkmedia.com/family to learn more about Let's Talk Politics. So when you think about some of those words, I mean, let's talk about moralism for a second. And the behavior and probably the exterior and the focus on that. It seems like a lot of these come down to motivation. It's hard to look at someone and go, oh, they're a successist person or a moralist, right? I mean, maybe you figure it out if you're in deep relationship and you see the heart a little bit more. But, in a world right now where I think there's a lot of Christians who are wrestling with holiness and a revival repentance is happening, right? They're coming back to going, maybe I've been a moralist and I've cared a lot more about the externals than the internals. How would you kind of describe the differences between somebody who's, exterior might look that way, but like at the heart level, what does it mean to exhibit holiness, which means you're saying, no, it could look to someone else like you're being self-righteous, right? Because you're turning down the alcohol, for example, or you're walking away from something that other people want to do. How do you help believers navigate what's happening on the insides?
I think in many ways, the ways that moralism is resisted is found in kind of a patient attentiveness to God and our interior lives. And I know what it's like to be a moralist. I've been one. I mean, and catch me on the wrong week, I will be one in which I am not investigating and sometimes interrogating the motivations, the lies, the value systems that live within me. And so I think a moralist is just someone who lives on the surface. There's no time for interior examination. Mm-hmm. There's no time to examine motivation and reactions and anxiety. Mm-hmm. I'm living on the surface. I'm going from one thing to the next. Yeah. And there's no space to examine the ways I've been formed, the ways I've been shaped, the narratives that live within me, the lies that I've believed and internalized. And so I think Jesus' call, like when he talks about adultery and then lust, anger and then murder and then anger, all of these ways he's trying to get us to go, the ways that we have defined spiritual maturity, which is, by the way, a pretty low bar. I didn't kill anyone today. That's a pretty low bar. Jesus is saying there's some interior stuff that we have not tended to, which is why it is the deception that happens within Christianity is so terrifying, because things can look really nice on the outside. And if you've been around long enough, you know how to fake it till you make it, except that there's stuff happening beneath the surface on a subterranean level. So Gabe, I do think this is one way of thinking about it, where the degree to which we give ourselves kind of patient attentiveness to our interior world is the degree to which we live beyond moralism.
Well, and that's where, I would imagine the age we're in, this is getting more complicated with social media, algorithms. Like it's getting way more difficult to be quiet. I'm not sure 100 years ago there were the same competing distractions. I'm sure people stayed busy with farming and plowing the field, and I'm sure they stayed busy.
I'd rather go sit on a rock and talk to Jesus right now.
but my goodness, I mean, the thing we are up against and what this generation is up against is huge. And so this is why this rhythm of rest becomes so important. And that's what you're mentioning. Like if you don't have the quiet moment to reflect on your life, your decisions, your behavior, your attitudes, the way I just talked to Rebekah about some argument we're having, like if there is not the pause time, then we easily are living probably more in the wide path.
When Jesus uses the word destruction, it's very easy to say, oh, that's like the age to come. that's hell, whatever it might be. And I think scholars can wrestle with that. I do think it also includes, however, right here, right now, to live according to the broad path where we are avoiding ourselves, where we're living at a violent pace, will lead to some destruction, the destruction of our souls, our families, our communities. I think it's a right here, right now word of urgency that Jesus is trying to communicate.
Right. The destruction is the separation or the break in relationship, right? This avoidance of, I think a lot of people want to do the reflection in theory, right? But that does require rhythm, just like Sabbath or prayer. Like the reflection can happen in this, what I call like an ongoing dialogue with God. And so for me, communion can look like pray in the car, in the middle of the night if I'm waking, talk to God just about all the things, or even ask. Sometimes I love Andrew Murray's words in Abiding with Christ, to just set my intention again. If my mind's spinning and I go, Jesus, I abide in you, meaning right now in the present moment, I abide in you. I attune to you and I worship you. I praise you. And then I pause. And that can happen any moment of any day when I do feel those pangs of anxiety, which we will talk about here in a moment. But then this other piece of a greater inventory, you reference inventory. I'm a big fan of taking inventory. That's the first chapter in the rest rhythm. But this prayer, the journal, is also an ongoing dialogue with God, in that there's just this free play on like just talking about what is it that you want me to know about this? Give me the discernment. And I think people get a little intimidated, even in a journal, if it feels like they're coming in with no expectations, right? And just how to have that exchange that does expose motivations, because that takes time. It takes someone proximate and close to you. And sometimes those motivations are so deep that it is the air we breathe. It is our code of conduct in our achievement. And like I had to make a hard decision the last couple of weeks, and it tore me up. I mean, it was the hardest decision. And I finally with Gabe was like, this is forcing me to get to the root of why is this the most difficult? Like my identity has tethered itself to this decision, so much so that I'm having a little bit of an existential crisis by walking away from something that it would be safer and easier to stay. And yet I know the Lord keeps like leading me in that direction, but it wasn't just to obey. It was like to acknowledge the wrestle that was happening internally for 2 whole weeks in poor Gabe. But what it did do is it exposed something that had been there, for a couple decades. And I wouldn't have known that had I not seen my behavior kind of act out in a way that was so torn on a decision. So what does that look like for people to expose those motivations practically in a journal, maybe in their reactions to things that they're torn about?
Maybe through your spouse, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, journaling for me, and I've been doing it for 26 years. Right when I became a follower of Christ, my grandfather and another mentor of mine gave me this practice. And I think for someone who's trying to do it, it's very easy to be pretty intimidated with journaling. The classic definition of prayer is lifting mind and heart to God. Lifting mind and heart to God. And I think journaling is lifting mind to heart and heart to God on paper. That's all it is. And so wherever we find ourselves in a given moment becomes an access point for prayer. And so whether that is anger, whether that is anxiety, whether it is joy, whether it is puzzlement, every thought, every feeling becomes an access point to prayer. And I think that's what's helped me to journal over the years. And there are times where I journal multiple times a week. There are times where I'm like, where is my journal? And I'm gone from it for a month or two, and then I come back to it. But I think that's probably the best place to start, because as we give ourselves kind of, again, patient attentiveness to our interior lives, I think the Holy Spirit now, when there's enough time to step away, is able to zero in on some of the subterranean fears, anxieties, the motivations. Why am I really wanting this? What do I really fear if I don't have this? Right. And then if we're honest enough, and this is the big challenge people have, what if someone finds my journal? That's one of the reasons people don't want to journal.
Dude, that's why I just am like.
He said, what if our kids read it one day? I'm like, you're going to be with Jesus. I don't think you're going to care.
No, that's such a hard thing for me. I've gotten through it, but I still had that journal.
So then we're examining that. So what is the real fear? But right, it's true. It's kind of like you've talked about this in other circumstances and settings, but just the interior life matching the out, the exterior, right? The inside of the cup looking dirty while the outside is clean. And this incongruence that actually leads us to this illness, right? Whether it's mental, we are starting to struggle. Physically, we're starting to struggle because we can't live incongruent lives. Like a healthy brain that's dysregulated can't function properly, can't think clearly, can't rest. Same with the body. That's when viruses take over and things start to grow and we struggle. And it's almost like a compounding problem. So this narrow way, though, is excavating, right? It feels very much to me like it's exposing the interior life that we were fine looking away from, right? Or fine dusting under the rug until somebody very close, whether it's our spouse or maybe our kids, they see things and they get to see the inside of the cup. And then obviously God sees everything. How would you counsel someone who knows that they are living an incongruent life or a lack of integrity, integrous life? And it might not be some big, shameful, dark secret, but they just know there's some unrest between their insides matching their outsides. Maybe they don't feel free to come as they are and be who they are because they have to put on for the approval of others, whatever that looks like. How would you encourage them to begin this journey back to wholeness?
Yeah, I think part of it is in how reframing what integrity is. I think what you're getting at is integrity, integration, congruence, all the words that you've used there. When I think about like integrity, that the outside is matching the inside, that who I am when no one is around me is similar to who I am when people are around me. That's just one definition of integrity. But there are plenty of places where that integrity has nothing to do with other people whatsoever. It's just like, to what degree is there on the outside consistent happening on the inside? The way I've tried to think about integrity is whenever there's angst in a person's life, they realize there's something off in this area. Integrity for me is not about living something perfectly, but wrestling with something faithfully. That's my go-to definition of integrity. Not living something perfectly. No one will live something perfectly, but wrestling with something faithfully. And so if we're thinking about the lack of congruence we have with money, the lack of congruence we have when conflict emerges and we find ourselves dysregulated and disoriented, I think the question is that begs to be asked is, to what degree am I wrestling faithfully with this reality? To what degree am I opening myself up to God to hear God's counsel and wisdom in my own heart? To what degree am I opening myself up to professionals and to friends who can help me navigate this particular moment in my life? And so the lack of congruence and integrity, I think, is not so much a matter of living something perfectly. I don't think we ever get there. But how do we wrestle with it?
Yeah.
And I think that is the application now is unending. But I think that's the go-to question for me when I think about, I'm lacking congruence in this area here. I think I need some help from God and from others.
Yeah, you talk about in the last half of the book all these topics of how to walk the narrow path. And you talk about our witness, anger, words, desires, money, anxiety, judgments, decisions, or enemies. I mean, these are all hot button topics, right? And so what you're saying is this might not be a perfected expression of what that is, in the kingdom of heaven. But what is the wrestle, and how are you more honest? So integrous in being honest with the disconnect. And so we talk a lot about therapy and counseling, and I appreciate it, and it definitely is valid and necessary. I would love to talk for a minute about this with how do you process this with people you're not paying? You might feel so totally peaceful the minute you walk out of your counselor's office, but then you are sitting right up against, the people in your life that know you more than anyone else, and all of a sudden those triggers are right back. How do you examine the heart and the motivations with the people under your roof who you would rather walk away when things get hard, or they would rather walk away when things get hard? How do you lean into that in your marriage, your parenting, maybe your closest friends?
I think for me, and this is part of the discipleship I've received from my predecessor, a guy by the name of Pete Scazzaro, who I'm sure a number of your listeners would know. There's an aspect of discipleship that Pete is really gifted in that has helped me to do this. And his doctoral work is in family systems theory, with a focus on the genogram, the ways that our families have shaped us, our families of origin. And over the last decade, I have really spent a lot of time studying, researching, and trying to integrate my own learnings within our context. And so I do think a big part of what you're getting at is our willingness and ability to examine the ways that we've been formed by our families of origin, which have in many ways created three things in us. Our families of origin have given us positive legacies and negative legacies, which is why at our church we say Jesus lives in your heart, but grandpa lives in your bones. Grandpa has given us positive legacies, and grandpa and grandma and everyone else, there's some negative stuff that we're carrying because of them as well. And when I think about how do I examine, I just came from the therapist's office and then I'm back into the place where there's high tension. I think the question is, what are the patterns? What are the traumas? What are the scripts that we're living according to? And this is kind of a tool that we use at our church to help people with a tool like examining our families of origin. Because I think if we can begin to go to this, it sounds bad to say, like the scene of the crime where we were initially formed and sometimes malformed, what are the patterns that are often repeated one generation to the next? And so, for example, in my family, we don't do conflict well. My Puerto Rican family, I used to say, we don't do conflict, or we don't do sadness, we do salsa. We have a hard time entering into some difficult spaces with others. And I know that about myself. There's some traumas. And when I think about traumas, I think that word sometimes gets misapplied. But I do think there's some things that happened that should not have happened. And then there are things that didn't happen that should have happened. Right. And then there's these scripts, these internalized messages that I carry about myself. I think this is the hard work of transformation. Unless we are investigating these particular avenues and areas of our lives, I'm not sure we're just going to go right from the counselor's office back home in that intense environment without an intentional reordering of our lives. And so I'll just give one practical example of how this has worked out in my own life. I grew up in a home where I overfunctioned a lot because of some of the instability of the house I grew up in. I had to grow up very quickly. And that meant I was in some ways parentified. Had to take a role of kind of a parental role emotionally because I was the oldest of five. That kind of over-functioning, doing for others what they can and do for themselves, has stayed with me for a number of years. And so as a parent, as a husband, as a pastor, if I'm in the wrong place, I will do for others what they can and should do for themselves. And so a big part of me growing in this particular area is learning to let go and let people take responsibility for their own lives in an appropriate way. Now, if I don't have language of the ways my family have shaped me and why I am the way I am today, I'm going to miss out some significant areas where transformation is available to me, which is, I think that's some of the work that I've done over the years and just that one particular example of my life.
Thanks for sharing that, Rich. That speaks to me. I know that that's something Rebekah and I've been talking about more recently, about how we have two children with special needs. I can have a real tendency to take care of them super well as a way to avoid emotional engagement with my other kids or even with Rebekah, because there's always a need with these two children. They're always happy to have their needs met, even when they're capable of likely doing what should be done.
There's a need that they're capable of meeting, but sometimes we are more comfortable meeting it for them.
Right. And it serves as a distraction from like the deeper need of loneliness perhaps I'm feeling, or the need to be to feel like I matter, right? And to them, I matter because I'm meeting some need and they're happy about it. And so I appreciate you sharing that. And I think for Rebekah and I mean, that's the journey, even this season in these conversations, is how do we all take the time? And I love that that's where you've started us today is, man, the need to block the time, which is so hard for all of us to do the self-reflection, which to some people even hearing it, they're like, what is that? And I know some husbands, because we have a lot of couples that come to our retreats and we have these conversations. And sometimes it feels like women are really good at this and men just don't even think they need it. And then when they start to awaken to it, it's like a whole new language. And then they realize, where's this been my whole life? I've never been trained or taught or knew how to think about this. in a way that helped me cultivate my heart more than just my mind and my productivity. So you're helping us go there today.
Yeah, and it's examination. So, right, obviously, like awareness, our hope, or the illumination through the Holy Spirit would breed some form of transformation or action, right? I think sometimes in this space, there can be so much self-reflection that we start to really understand our hearts well enough to describe them. And we can describe our traumas, we can describe our origin stories. I mean, we've been in this space for a long time and we know it all, but we might not actually expose our heart. We can just talk about our heart. We can almost like self-diagnose what's happening right now. But does that mean I'm tender towards you? No, I just know I can now rationally tell you in my logic brain what's happening between us. And so the transformation, taking it from the examination to the healing, talk about that. Not because the exposure isn't good. It is good, but it's not the end. The end is that we become more formed into the image of Jesus. So talk about that healing.
Yeah, what I would say, like the act of it, you're absolutely right. The act of interior examination is not to get lost in naming and understanding my own poor motivations, fears, anxieties. In fact, I think if I can borrow another phrase from family systems theory, I think in many ways, the goal of the interior work that I do is to become a more differentiated person. And by differentiation, here's my simple way of explaining, and I'll expound a little. Differentiation out of family systems is the ability to be distinct from someone without disconnecting from them. Distinct. So I have my own values. I have my own preferences. I have my own opinions. At the same time, my goal is not to name those values, opinions, preferences in such a way that creates disconnection from us, but in a way that I'm able to hold on to myself and not lose you in the process.
Right.
And I think our society is so either cut off or enmeshment. It's either I have to cut off from you, I'm going to disconnect, I'm going to be myself, or I can't be myself. Therefore, I'm going to disappear into you. So I think the goal ultimately of our ability to name our pain, our traumas, our anxieties, our sadness, our grief is in many ways, number one, to feel the very real stuff in us, and at the same time, to learn what it means to be a distinct person without disconnecting from another person.
Right.
And so for me, differentiation, remaining close to God, close to myself, close to others, especially in times of high anxiety, that's the fruit of this work, not simply navel gazing and having a better ability to name my own stuff going on beneath the surface.
Yeah, what you're speaking to, I think, is the heart of what we believe so much about, is that to repair does not mean you break relationship, that to repair requires relationship. So whether that's in your marriage or your relationship with your kids or your friends, like having some of those difficult conversations and staying in the room and inviting Jesus to kind of give both of you the right language and words and, that just that intimacy, because if he has formed us to be together, right? We are a household of faith. We are a body with many parts. The body's not supposed to just break up, right? The arm's not supposed to just go over here. And so this is a challenge, because so much, I think, in this mental health space, sometimes the language jumps to, if you can't find that with that person or you're triggered by them, just walk away. But what we're missing out on is the internal tension of staying in a place that might be actually robbing us of like our own entitlements and our own pride and our own ego and our own persona, to go, oh, there is more that you're trying to form in me and humble me through this life. So,
well, Rich, we're so thankful for your voice, your words, just the way in which you're caring for a lot of people. And thank you for just laying out your own journey through this, your own struggles, being honest with us about the things you're walking through and still learning. And we appreciate who you are. So thanks for being a part of this
so
today.
Grateful. So grateful.
A gift to be with you. Thanks for the kind invitation.
Wasn't that amazing?
Yeah, it's always, Rich always adds like a deeper perspective to things that you might not have considered. And I love that. I love people who challenge your thinking about all these assumptions you just felt like we're right, but then he's like, whoa, no, let's go a little bit deeper here.
Yeah, and he's so gentle and humble and so smart. I mean, just the way he talks, the way he writes, he just gets to the point, but he does it in a way that is kind but clear. And I really appreciate that about him. And I appreciate how he has been very honest about the things he's trying to change, and that's really important, I think, as a pastor or a leader, spiritual leader, to show like, here's what I've learned the hard way and here's how I'm changing. Yes.
And I also want to remind you guys, we have a great opportunity. We're only 6 weeks away from our retreat here in Franklin, our emotional health retreat. It's going to be a great time for 2 days, November 21st and 22nd. And as a listener, you get $100 off if you register to join us at RebekahLyons.com/retreat using code RFL100. And many of you have commented on one of our most recent guests, so much so that we said she needs to be at the retreat. And it was our conversation with Emily McLeod-Wolf, talking about all things hormones, nutrition, how our bodies and minds really interact. And I think having her with us as well for Q&A is going to be an added element that's going to be really fun. But go check out that website. Check out those couple of days. This is our 5th time doing it. It's always an incredible experience, I think, for everybody there, partly because you find some new friends, but you realize you're not alone as you're trying to work out all of these areas. I know Rebekah and I have had to work through as well about our emotional health and our relational health. And it's kind of a great time when you're headed into the holidays, winter, a lot of time with family, a lot of time with relatives, and it can be a really healthy way to enter into that kind of a season. So I hope you can join us, and we'll look forward to seeing you November 21st and 22nd here in Franklin.